Russian authorities are making underage to join Russian military already. Even we have those instances from occupied areas from Donetsk, Lugansk region, Crimea, much less from the so-called newly occupied territories. But we have already evidence about that children are being used as soldiers for Russian army.
Hello and welcome to Frontline for Times Radio with me, Kate Gerbeau. And this time we're joined from Kyiv in Ukraine by Anastasiia Romaniuk, who works for the NGO Civil Network OPORA. She's a digital platforms analyst who's been investigating the ways the Russian Federation has been trying to change Ukrainian identity in the temporarily occupied areas, including the targeting of children. Anastasiia, it's great to welcome you onto Frontline. Thank you very much for spending the time with us. We met virtually last week ahead of this conversation, and it was just after those horrific attacks on the Children's Hospital and the maternity centre in Kyiv. The city was in shock. Can you just give me a little bit of an update of how people are now and what daily life is like?
Yeah, it's definitely extremely painful, and it's not only Ohmadet, despite the fact it's the most outrageous and painful because they were targeting I would say the most vulnerable group you can imagine, like the children who are battling cancer, but also a lot of buildings around the hospital were damaged by the strike, and also there were another strike in different regions of Kyiv, and both to the hospitals. That is why people already the people are mostly shocked by those events, but in Ukraine, we don't have any chance to reflect on how do we feel, because after every single tragedy, we have to be prepared for another one. That's why we give ourselves a chance to grieve when it happens, and we work on how to work on damage done, like physically working on the site of the strike, like helping the people who were affected, and continue working, preparing for another strike, unfortunately.
And how is daily life like in Kyiv at the moment?
Now it's much worse than if you were speaking like months or 2 months ago, because the situation with electricity is much worse, and especially it's extremely uncomfortable because of the heat wave Ukraine is in the middle of, because right now it's about 36 degrees, 37 degrees for the last 2 weeks. And for example, today I have only 4 hours of electricity, not in a row. That is why it's extremely exhausting. Many houses in Ukraine don't have gas, for example, and those who rely for electricity, people mostly cannot do their daily chores. People who live on the highest floors have hard time doing any basic day-to-day tasks. That is why it's extremely hard nowadays, I would say, and for me personally as well under these circumstances.
Yeah, and it must also be extremely difficult to be doing your job and to be able to continue to do that. And it's amazing that you have been able to, with your organization, work alongside others on this special report that's been released a few days ago. This was by the Ukrainian Parliament Commissioner for Human Rights, and it was on Ukrainian children and what it describes as Russia's systemic policy for destroying their identity in areas it occupies. Can you give us a little bit of an overview of that report?
Yes, this is the second special report of Ukrainian Commission of Human Rights, and the last year the organization was reporting on how exactly, in which scale, and Russian authorities are deporting Ukrainian children, how it's being done, and what Ukrainian authorities are trying to do to return those children, and also providing the overview of all the violations of the children's rights which are done by Russia since the beginning of the war. And in this report, we were trying to contextualize the efforts of Russian authorities on the temporarily occupied territories towards Ukrainian children, because the deportation, exact act of kidnapping Ukrainian children, is only one event in the bigger picture, on bigger chain of events of changing the identity of people in general, of institutionalizing terror and terror on temporarily occupied territories, and basically pacifying a local population in order to make them to collaborate with the occupational authorities. Because in most of the occupied cities and towns, people are not willing to collaborate with Russians, and this is one of the efforts to make people to do so, to cooperate. And also with the efforts like this, with kidnapping children, indoctrinating children, militarizing them, we see multiple evidence that Russian authorities right now are trying to make their propagandistic myth about the only one nation and the unity of Ukrainians and Russians, to make this propagandistic myth into reality, having those territories under control by erasing Ukrainian identity.
Just I'll ask you a little bit more about the detail of that, but just to rewind to the bit about how children have been moved to those temporarily occupied areas, which include also Crimea and Sebastopol in the report. They've been moved from other parts of Ukraine, but they've also been deported from those areas to the Russian Federation and to Belarus. Can you tell me how it all started and how it was done?
Yes, this unlawful and terrible practice of deporting Ukrainian children has started since the beginning of the war in 2014, and since the occupation of Crimean Peninsula, for example, the Russian authorities started this program, which was called the Train of Hope, by which they were encouraging Russian families, Russian citizens, to adopt Ukrainian orphans who happened to be on the occupied Crimea. But before the full-scale invasion in 2022, they were mostly targeting children who were in under the custody of the state, mostly orphans or children without the parental care. And also the expansion of magnitude of transporting Ukrainian children began also in the few months before the February 2024, the full-scale invasion. And those efforts were explained by so-called evacuation of the children from the territories close to the front line. And since the beginning of the full-scale war, all the practices which we have been observing since 2014, they just expanded in the scale, because if before we were talking about much few instances and not that not that much of attention from the Russian media, and not that usage of those cases in the propagandistic means, but in 2022 and till nowadays, Russian authorities are actively displaying all the cases of how they, as they call that, care about children, evacuating them from the areas which were close to the front line, or providing them with opportunities to have a vacation, as they call it, in the summer camps in occupied Crimea, or in Belarus, or other recreational institution on the territory of Russian Federation. And so basically, is I would estimate that before the full-scale invasion in 2022, those acts were present, but it seems like that Russians were training the logistics and trying to check the methods, how it can be done. And after the outbreak of the full-scale war, they started doing it systematically.
And what do you know about what happens to those children when they are deported?
At the moment, Ukrainian state knows about approximately 20,000 children who were deported from the temporarily occupied territories. And as I mentioned, before, they were mostly kidnapping the children who were under custody of state. After the beginning of the full-scale invasion, they started also targeting children who actually have their families, have parents, and also kidnapping children from schools, or, for example, from the streets. We have reported several occasions that in several smaller villages or towns, for example, families were even afraid to let their children walk down the street because of the occasions where the children were kidnapped by Russian military. In the most common practice of how it being conducted in the 2022 until now, it's the suggestion to the parents to give the permission to take their children to the recreational camps, either in Crimea or in Russian Federation or Belarus, and they were promoting these programs like give your children an opportunity to rest from all the horrors of war. But in many instances, for example, they were refusing to tell the parents exact place, exact cities where those camps were situated. And in most cases, children were staying on those camps for a much longer time than it was first announced. Like in most occasions, they promote those programs like to give the children the vacation for like 2 weeks or so, and children can spend months and months on those camps without any contact with the families until the families manage to find their children and return them back to families. And there are also instances where the children were transported from those camps in unknown directions, and some destinies of some children who end up in those camps are still unknown, unfortunately, to nowadays. But yeah, mostly it's being done as recreational or vocational programs for children.
And for those children that are living in the temporarily occupied areas, how difficult has it been, or how do you actually build up a picture of what is going on there? Because the information is not only shut down, but it's manipulated.
Yes, of course. First of all, we mostly in all the evidence that I provide during our conversation as well are based, first of all, by the interviews of the witnesses of the occupation, which were being collected both by the Office of the Commissioner for Human Rights and also by the Polish branch of our organization, OPORA in Poland, who also collect the evidence, testimonies of the witnesses of the war crimes witnesses. And that is why we have some information how the housing looks like, or how the recreational programs are being conducted on those camps from the children who actually been through that. So from the families who managed to return to Ukraine to report what they've been through. And unfortunately, in those camps, all this recreational schedule of the children is being packed with the so-called patriotic education. Like, for example, children are made to speak only Russian, and we also have an evidence from the children who returned from there that they were being bullied for using any Ukrainian words, not even sentences, but for example, if child is trying to speak Russian as she's being forced to, but sometimes some Ukrainian words slip. And even for those instances, the child is being bullied both by the fellow group mates, because in most instances the groups are mixed. So in those camps, not only Ukrainians are staying, but also like Russian or Belarusian children as well. So in most occasions, children who are returning from the so-called recreation like that, they need a lot of social psychological support and rehabilitation after what they've been through, because also on the daily basis we have the evidence of many occasions when children were forced to listen to Russian hymns on the premises of those recreational camps. Also, they had lots of lessons conducted by the organization, which is called the army of youth, or Yunarmia in Russian language. This is a totally militaristic organization which is providing basically the militaristic education for youth. They are providing, on the one hand, like they call it definitely patriotic education, and they contain the lessons on Russian history, or I would say Russian perception on history. And even from this point, this is extremely traumatic experience for Ukrainian children, because on the Russian interpretation of history, which is being taught by the members of the Yun Army, the Ukrainian state has never been existing, and they were also interpreting the events of 2014 as a military coup, according to the official position of Russian Federation, and that right now, if you are being the patriot of Ukrainian state, if you speak Ukrainian language, if you're being supportive to Ukrainian authorities and Ukrainian state in general, you are a Nazi, and every single person who is like that is a Nazi as well, which is extremely traumatic for the child to hear that even speaking your own like mother tongue may make you to be associated with such great evil as Nazi.
How many children are we talking about in these temporarily occupied territories? And can you just give me an idea? I mean, it sounds extremely traumatic, the kind of pressure they're under. Can you just also tell me what their sort of daily lives are like from what you know?
Yes. The numbers I provided before, like 20,000 children, is the children who were forcibly moved from temporarily occupied territories. And right now, by the approximate calculation, because like it's important to remember that Ukrainian state has almost no access to temporarily occupied territories, and everything we can do, we rely on, is impossible to talk about the exact numbers, but approximately it's about 1.5 million children who are living under occupation at the moment. And also, like the experience I described of the children who have been exposed to those so-called recreational camps, it basically very similar, but maybe different in intensity, because when child is being taken away and is being forced to stay in one single facility and listen to such classes and being exposed to pro-Russian ideological narratives every single day. But for Ukrainian child who living with their family but under occupation, is basically the same experience which are they being exposed in schools, because since they after very quickly after occupying the territory, Russian authorities starting to implement a Russian educational system on those territories. And that is why, for example, the part of the education in every single school, right now I'm talking about every school under occupation. First of all, there are mandatory classes which are happening every Monday, and they are called lessons about importance. And during this class, children, like every Monday, have to listen to Russian hymn in very like celebratory environments. They have to watch the Russian flag is being up, and on those classes every Monday they discuss the details about how to be a Russian patriot, how to be loyal to Russian values, for example, about how the Russian family must look like, and also about the how to be, put long story short, how to be the proper Russian citizen. And this is mandatory classes for every single class. Also, they have another type of class, like special classes. They call it the classes of courage. And those classes are being conducted for special occasions, like, for example, memorial dates from the military history of Russia. And if in the instance of lessons about importance, those are about the much broader topic like values, families, etc. On the other hand, the lessons about courage are devoted especially about the military history of Russian Federation, and also those classes serve as a contact with the veterans of the modern Russian war in Ukraine. They are coming to class, they are spending some time with children, and basically those classes are being, the function of those lessons is to glorify the acts of the Russian military in Ukraine. And very often, if, for example, Russian serviceman or Russian military or Russian veteran, doesn't come in person, children are often encouraged to write letters of gratitude, like creating paintings to be sent to the Russian military to encourage them to continue conducting the brutal war in their homes, basically, and killing the fellow Ukrainians.
And what you're describing, it sounds like total indoctrination. What do you think the objective is? What does the Russian Federation want to get out of this?
First of all, the most important thing to understand about Russia is that every single human being under Russian control is an asset to achieve the more strategic goals of the Russian authorities. And in the context of the both kidnapping Ukrainian children and indoctrinating the children who are staying in their homes, is first of all, as I mentioned before, is making the local residents to cooperate with the authorities, because we have heard numerous examples that people often say that in every, like, it doesn't matter whether it's a rather big city or like tiny village, it's enough to have even the tiniest rumors that your neighbors or someone's relative's child was kidnapped by Russian authorities. It's already enough to spread terror in this area and make people more coercive to Russian authorities. Also, on the other hand, we have already recorded and open criminal cases, by the way, about that Russian authorities are making underage to join Russian military already. Even we have those instances from occupied areas from Donetsk, Lugansk region, Crimea, much less from the like so-called newly occupied territories. But we have already evidence about that children are being used as a soldiers for Russian army. And also we should remember that the war is already taking 10 years. And the 10 years means that one generation of children has already been through the full educational cycle of secondary education. That means that there is entire generation of children who has been through the entire process of indoctrination and militarization through the Russian system of secondary education. And that is why, like, many of those children who are already adults, who are already about like 18, 19, 20 years old, they are also joining Russian army and fighting in this war as well. And this is one of the one of the future goals for the Russian authorities as well. And also the deporting of Ukrainian children is one of the means of passportization of the local residents, because like many people are trying to avoid being granted the Russian passport. And for example, if child doesn't attend local school, because for many parents don't want their children to be exposed to this indoctrination, and those children are being tracked down by local authorities. And after the local occupational authorities realize that this child does not attend local school, the parents of this child are being threatened to lose their custody on their own child. And after knowing that this is like horrifying by itself, but knowing the fact that child can be taken away not only from like your home, from your care, but also taken away like even thousands of kilometers away, because we know the instances that the children who were kidnapped, they were even taken as far as, maybe you have checked where the last prison of late Alexei Navalny was, in Yamal-Nenetsky district, like extremely far in deep Russia.
Now, I was going to say, thankfully that there have been some cases of children being returned to Ukraine. But when you listen to the way you describe what is going on in terms of the temporarily occupied territories, but also what's been happening with the children being forcibly removed from Ukraine, I mean, just specifically at those temporarily occupied territories, it seems like it's going to take generations for them to recover. I mean, what kind of future can you envisage for them?
Yes, definitely, it's extremely traumatic experience, and that is why like those damage which is being done for entire generation is also like, to my personal opinion, is one of the strategic goals of the of Russian authorities, because like in the modern war, in the war which they are conducting right now, this is not necessary to kill people in millions to erase the entire nation, because all these efforts like this, like physical killing, torturing, terrorizing, kidnapping children, indoctrination through education, indoctrination of adults as well, kidnapping adults as well, is a one big strategic picture of erasing the Ukrainian identity in general, because everything which is being done on temporarily occupied territories, which is about 20% of the Ukrainian lands, is making people terrified of this part of their identity. Also, like having this inner fear to practice the parts of their identity, like speaking the language solely. And that is why, like, we see that the children who are luckily being returned to Ukraine, they suffer very difficult consequences of being exposed to efforts like this. This is extremely traumatic for them, and that's why they are going through the long-term rehabilitation process. And for us, for Ukraine, it means also a huge challenge to come up with a policy how to rehabilitate the people who, when we talk about the thousands of people, when we liberate those territories.
And have you been able to get a sense of if it's working, how well it's working in those temporarily occupied territories to achieve those strategic objectives of erasing Ukrainian identity? Do you think it's being successful?
Frankly speaking, I definitely have no means to check any hypothesis I have, because right in the moment, no Ukrainian institution, no Ukrainian organization has access to temporarily occupied territories, and international organizations are not allowed to enter those territories as well. So basically, if it's not being reported by Russian authorities or Russian media, if it's, for example, any foreign reporter, etc., it's also not such a trustworthy information, because they allow to get to those territories only those actors who are loyal or sympathetic to Russian state. But we definitely see the intent behind at this point we can speak about genocidal intent behind Russian actions. And from the scale which we can define from the open source, and frankly speaking, the scale we are being able to see right now, it's only the minimum amount. That is why I believe the consequences will be tremendous, and that is why, like, many people, I know for sure, I know for the fact that there are so many people who are waiting for the return of Ukraine to those territories, who are staying patriotic to Ukrainian state, but from different because of the different reasons, they have to stay on those territories. Like for some people, it's important to stay where they grow up, or for example, someone cannot leave their elder parents or grandparents, etc. There are so many reasons why people stay, but for those people, it's extremely painful and scary to stay there for such a long time, because like every single day you're being exposed to the threat of being tortured, of being killed, and you have to be extremely careful of even about your digital behavior, for example, of even to get information about what is going on in Ukraine, or basically get any piece of news, for example, which was not censored by the Russian propagandistic machine, is quite a struggle for those people and quite a risk.
And just finally, Anastasia, in your research, in trying to actually look at the scale of this non-violent pursuance of genocidal intent that you mentioned, what is the thing that stays with you the most? What's the thing that's left the biggest impression on you?
Frankly speaking, for me personally, the most painful thing about that they are targeting even the youngest ones, because the programs of the so-called patriotic education begin as early as kindergarten. And even in instances of the on the first side, neutral events, neutral interactions with children, for example, like the celebration of New Year, Russian authorities are still managing to turn every single event, every single interaction to the propagandistic event, or, for example, the case to make children and their families exposed to the contact with the Russian authorities or Russian military. And for example, the organization for the youngest is called like Baby Eagles, Orlata in Russian. And this is targeted for the children as young as like 5 years old. And for me, it's the most horrifying which you can do, is targeting the most vulnerable ones.
Anastasiia Romaniuk, it's been really good talking to you. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You've been watching Frontline for Times Radio with me, Kate Gerbeau. My thanks to our producers today, Louis Sykes and Morgan Burdick, and for you for watching. If you'd like to support us, you can subscribe now, or you can listen to Times Radio for the latest news and in-depth analysis, or go to thetimes.co.uk. For now, though, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.